G'day. Okay, fair warning, this is going to be a bit of a long one. One of the reasons that I'm doing this meditation channel as a teaching exercise is that there's a lot of misconception out there and people get into trouble. And I'm going to focus on the Vipassana 10-day courses that became very popular. I don't know how popular they are now, but still I think a lot of people do them. Now there's a bit of propaganda that people should be aware of. Many of these courses, they'll state that Vipassana, the Anapanakam Vipassana technique, is what the Buddha taught. It's what the Buddha practiced, in fact. Well, that's 100% completely untrue. There's an American academic by the name of Robert Sharf over in Berkeley, California. He's done good work in researching the history of this. The techniques that are promoted these days, they come out of Burma, maybe 100 and something years ago. At the time they were controversial amongst the traditional Buddhists. The lead proponent was a fellow called Mahasi Sayadaw. It was basically his techniques that have been taught, and it's taken off, and these techniques do produce a vivid result, but they're not without their dangers, and I think people should understand that when they are engaged in these things. Now, apart from the fact that it's unknown really what the Buddha actually practiced and what he actually taught, these techniques do have some other history. They're very much in line with Hindu practices, which are basically ascetic practices. I mean, the classic picture of the Indian sadhu is lying on his bed of nails. Today you can go to India and you see the various yogis sitting in full sun, and they've put lit fires around themselves. These are very ascetic practices. Well, so too the Vipassana. It's an ascetic practice. You impose this strict discipline upon yourself, and you believe you're meditating. Okay. Now, the attraction of these things is that they do, if you put a significant amount of effort in, they do produce exotic experiences. And occasionally, you get some useful insight out of it. Now, how people, at least from the West, are getting in trouble with these things is that what can happen is that there's a flood of emotional experience, emotional conflict that may have been lurking inside the person's psyche, which up until doing those practices they manage to cope with. They find different ways of getting by, but as a result of doing these practices they become completely vulnerable to their internal state. It floods back all at once, and some people flip out, seriously flip out. Now, I've got personal experience where I saw 30 years ago. I was doing some volunteer work in a psychiatric ward, and one young girl turned up. She'd come from this straight out of this course, and she was now in the psych ward. Now, she went on to attempt suicide. She was fortunate in that she stood in front of a train and jumped out of the way at the last moment. However, did suffer serious injury. There are numerous anecdotal reports of people committing suicide after these courses. Now, something's wrong. Right? Now, if the average person, okay, they'll do all right with these things, but there is a danger, and I think people should know about it. Where the problem is, it's in the technique itself. Now, for those who are unfamiliar what happens in these Vipassana courses. Typically they're 10 days, silent retreats. There may be a whole lot of other people, but the instruction is not to engage in conversation, it's to be within yourself. Okay, so it proceeds with maybe 3 or 3.5 days of what they call anapana, which is observing the touch of the air. Usually that's the main technique. And the instruction is that when your mind wanders, bring it back to the touch of the air. So it's a concentration exercise. And it requires maintaining a fairly strict level of alertness. Well, there's where the problem is, that you're instructed to, when you're engaged in thinking, you're instructed to suppress that thought. Right? Bring your attention back to the breath is suppressing your thinking. Okay. Now, the reason for that instruction is that you want to focus, gain some control over your attention span, which you're then going to use for the later technique, which is the Vipassana, which is usually going systematically through the body, observing just body sensation, and you do that for 6.5 days. Okay, and that typically will create a trance state in those people who succeed in doing more than a few hours of this a day. You'll get some kind of trance state out of that, and along with that instructions is that when you're doing the Vipassana, you're instructed to sit still, not move, regardless of any kind of discomfort, and just to observe the discomfort. Okay, so that's now become the ascetic part of the training. Okay, well, all of this is producing result because it's you're forcing yourself into you're engaging in a self-conflict, and you're dealing with pain, and the only way really to get through those practices is to find a way to relax through it. You've got to sort of trick your mind somehow that you're not it's not pain, it's sensation. Okay, now someone doing lengthy practice, they're going to find themselves in a more relaxed condition than they're used to. Okay, well, that's all good, except that it's been preceded with this process of suppressing thought. Now, this is, as Shakespeare might say, here's the rub. Thought has a cause. If you find yourself thinking about something, there's a reason why you're thinking it. And my understanding is that every thought ultimately has some kind of emotional basis to it. So if you've got a whole lot of things bothering you, right, and then you do one of these courses, well, the things that are bothering you are emotional things. Right? And depending on how serious the internal distress is, if you start suppressing this stuff and then proceed to relax, at the end of the course, right, you're likely to find yourself overwhelmed by your own emotional state. Not only things that are uppermost in your mind, but because you've got this more relaxed state, some of the deeper emotional conflicts which might be lurking in your subconscious, they're also going to be more likely to be experienced consciously. Now, this is why people flip out. They are suddenly confronted with a whole lot of internal states, internal distress, all at once, and they react to that emotionally as well. It feeds on itself, and if you're not well equipped to deal with that, you can end up in the psych ward, or some people actually commit suicide. And This is the fault of the technique and the fault of the practice, that this happens. Now, I have been suggesting a different approach, a gentler approach, one in which you don't suppress anything. So in an early video I've explained it in the close your eyes, relax and stay awake video, and why that's different and why it's safer and why it actually is meditation is that you just allow whatever you're thinking about to happen, but you also start to notice why it's happening, and it's a very gentle approach. And it's based on a very simple principle that any kind of long-held internal agitation, well, it gets held in the body physically. It's a physical experience as well, and it's to be found as a tension. Now, you'll find those tensions and you release them one by one, not all at once, and that's the way to do it. Right? So it's a self-limiting practice in that you're only going to become aware of the most distressing things first, like the most obvious distressing things first, and some of the deeper things that you need to find within yourself, you'll arrive at those slowly. And in a more experienced way. Getting used to how you feel when those feelings aren't pleasant. Well, there's a bit of a skill involved, and it's best that you learn that skill rather than being thrown in the ocean and told to swim. So. There's the forcing techniques that force you into a relaxed state. Okay, that's it's interesting. It's interesting. You can see these relaxed states that perhaps you were unaware of that you could abide in. But it's not suitable, by and large, unless you've got a fairly, unless you understand yourself already fairly well. Now, I'm not one to sort of tell people what to do. I think that if people want to practice these things, by all means, go ahead, do it. But you should be aware of what you're doing and have some understanding of how these things are going to affect you. The attraction of all of these things is that they force a result, they lead to altered states, and people confuse altered states with insight, with it being meditation, with understanding. Now, it can lead to some kind of understanding, but it's it's the walking across hot coals method of going about it, and it's completely unnecessary. All right, look, I'm going to leave it there. There's other things I would talk about, which maybe I'll bring up in a future video. But for the time being, short and sweet. See you later.